All right, we are back, and I am thrilled that we are on our third episode of our Stronger Together podcast, partnering with Identity Automation, ensuring our schools and students are safe. And for the second time, I'm thrilled to welcome back Dr. Tim Tillman to really dive into more specifics of our conversations. Each week, we kind of dive into more conversations and build off the last one. So, Dr. Tillman, welcome back, and I look forward to connecting with you around multi-factor authentication, and many other topics that we're going to talk about. So thank you for joining us and welcome back.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
And for those who might not have checked out the first episode, and if you haven't, make sure to check that out. Can you share a little bit about your work, your path into education and the work you're doing now?
So, sure. My path in education started as a student. I was a student hacker in high school, and that turned into a blossoming, beautiful career in network security and network administration. And I've spent the last 30 years or so kind of working in education on and off. I've also worked in healthcare, worked in startups, but my first love was always education. And now, in my current capacity, I have semi-retired from IT leadership in schools. And instead, now I'm kind of sharing my knowledge with other IT leaders and kind of being an evangelist for cybersecurity in particular, and really trying to make a difference and trying to push the ball forward and raise the ocean, if you will, and try to get a lot of K-12 districts across the country to give them the help they need, basically, and give them the resources they need to form a strong cybersecurity posture.
No, and that's great when you introduced yourself, and I giggled a little bit. It's so true that we started off this journey as students. And for me, I kind of gravitated to kind of the teacher leadership side and trying to work with my teachers in high school. And I knew that was a path I wanted to go into. And then in this new role, and for those who haven't tuned in yet, my name is Matthew Joseph, and I am the Assistant Superintendent of Technology and Learning. And I've gone through many paths myself, from teacher to principal to Director of Innovation to Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. And now on the technology side of it, that was one of the things that really I've been thrilled about this year, is talking with some of our students. Like, I've had a chance to connect with our high school students and say, what are we missing? Where's your voice in this? And that's more of my wheelhouse, being in a principal lens and school lens. But that was great when you said that, because that's what this is all about. I know that Identity Automation really focuses on keeping students safe. And looking at that, I was very fortunate that really 2 weeks ago, I got an invitation in Massachusetts, where I'm at. They have an urban superintendents network, and once a month they meet. And this month was on cybersecurity. We've had a lot of kind of hacks, sadly, in our state, a few towns around us. Our district, first morning of our state testing, internet down. I'm getting calls at 5 o'clock. I'm like, I felt like Tom Cruise driving in, because they're like, are we close? Can we get this ready? The high school principal's like, we need to launch by 7:30. I'm like, give us 5 more minutes. Like, where to go? And it was 3 days in a row that someone tried to get in, and we worked together with many teams. And one of the things that came from our meeting, and all was well, our students got to take the test, but some of our neighboring districts did not. But one of the key agenda items on this meeting was around authentication. And for schools who might just have a password or a single password, can you really talk about what authentication means in this world of cybersecurity?
Well, sure. And actually, I wanted to add too that, at this point, it may be easier to count the school districts that have not had a cyber attack.
Right. That's so sad, but yes.
Because everybody has had some sort of incident, even the smallest little incidents, and a lot of those things is what we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to change. But if we look at authentication in its most simplistic form, authentication is verifying that I am who I say I am, right? So if I want access to resources, I have to provide some sort of identity or authentication, and then automated systems say, okay, I have this information on file. Let me compare that to what you gave me. And then if it matches, I let you have access to those resources. That is it in a nutshell. But it's an end user process. Authentication starts with the user. So the user has to request authentication from a system, and that's granted to them depending on a series of policies and configurations that allow them access. So, I mean, that's it, really. It's just verifying that the person logging into a resource is the actual person they say they are.
Yeah, and I think, just listening to you and your knowledge and experience in this, one of the things I want to dive into, because I've seen, sadly, over the years, teachers or educate individuals, I won't say call out any singular group, have their password on a Post-it note or have it on the back of their lesson plan book or something that easy for them to remember, or auto save sometimes. And so I know you have these high level conversations with your colleagues, but if you were talking to a group of new educators or individuals coming into this field, why is this so critical to have this authentication for our systems?
Well, it's critical because it's the first step in a security posture. It is the absolute first thing that most users or attackers do to try to gain access to resources. We want people to have access to resources. That's why we're here.
Sure.
That's why we have these computer networks. But we want to make sure that they only have access to the resources they are supposed to have access to. Now,
Yeah.
that's not to be confused. Like, authentication is not to be confused with authorization. Authorization is the actual granting of permissions.
Okay.
Authentication is ensuring that the person is who they say they are. They are using the proper username, they are using the proper account information, and even that they're in the proper location on the proper device, right? All of those things are part of identity that we use to verify authenticity or authentication. Words are hard.
Yeah.
But if we also look at, why is it that crucial aspect, right? It's because people log into resources all day long, every single day. They log
Sure.
in from home, they log in at school, they log in at grandma's house. They do all of these things. And we need to make sure that each time that happens, that there's not a breach of data or an accident or anything else that occurs.
Yeah, and I know for me, and I'll put myself in this category for a while before transitioning into this role. One of the things that in many districts I've worked in, and we're trying here as well, and I want to get your opinion, maybe more selfishly for my own work too, but again, to educate the masses at this. When I hear multi-factor authentication, it's like, oh, now I got to log in and I got to put my password in, or I got this little key I got to put in, and we're literally talking about what, 5-6 seconds, but it just drums up this kind of annoyance factor, and I don't know why, but talk to us about that, the purpose of multi-factor authentication and how that keeps us safe.
So if you only have a username and a password, it's very easy for me to determine your username because it probably matches some sort of syntax, right? If
Sure.
I'm also a user in your network, I could say, well, my username is first initial last name. I bet his is too, right?
Sure.
So usernames are easily guessed, easily expanded upon. Passwords, it turns out, over the last 30 years or 40 years, we've determined are also pretty easy to guess. People tend to use easy to remember passwords. They use birth dates. They use children's names. They use all of these things that we keep telling them not to do, but they do it anyway because it's easier to remember.
Sure.
So when you add another factor in, and we can describe what those factors are. Like, we keep saying the word factor, but
Sure.
when you add another layer of complexity, it exponentially makes that process harder to break.
Yeah, and I think you had mentioned right there that there are different types of factors. I'd love for you to expand on that and talk about the three different types of factors and why this is so critical. Again, for myself, one of the things I now have, and I've worked with our network, because now that I'm in this role, I'm on the payroll sites. I approve all of our budgets. I as the administrator of the tech department, I have a lot of access. And before I even started, he said, this isn't up for discussion. I know that you kind of rolled your eyes last year, and it's like, but this is the systems you now have. And again, I was like, oh, but it literally pops up my phone. I put a number in, and I was like, oh, that's it. And he's like, yeah, there's this myth about it. So, like, talk us through what might be the primary factors of multi-factor authentication.
So there are three basic factors, right? What we call a factor, which is an element. Let's think of it as an element, right, of authentication. And we classify them as something meaning something that's in your mind, something in your memory, something that you have, like your phone or some sort of token or some sort
Sure.
of idol or whatever. And then also something you are, right? So this would be something like biometrics, so your fingerprint or your retina
Yeah.
scan or those kinds of things. So those are the three basic factors. Passwords are something you know. Your phone, when it gets an SMS message or some sort of authentication token, that is actually something you have because it has to be sent to your individual phone that you set up in advance. So if you are not in physical possession of that phone, you can't log into that system, right? And then something you are kind of works in tandem with that. We've kind of combined in our world now, we've combined biometrics as a part of the phone too, right? It used to be these
Sure.
separate things. Biometrics used to be this other little device you had on your device on your table that you would read your fingerprint for. But now we've discovered that it's actually easier because everybody has a phone in their hand that we
Yeah.
can do biometrics on the device. So we did something you have and something you are at the same time, right? So having a combination of these three factors, and there are actually more than three, but the three primary ones, any combination of those of two or more makes it incredibly difficult, right? Somebody would have to know your password, your username, and be in possession of your phone.
Yeah.
That's really rare that that's going to happen, that they have all three of those things, right? Or they have, throw in biometrics on top of that, and it's almost impossible, right?
Yeah.
So that's why we kind of make the process a little more complex, but we also try to make it an easier process, even though there are more steps.
Yeah, and I think that's really an important piece of this. And I know for us, one of the things that we're trying to move forward with, and I'd love to, again, this feels like just me asking you questions to become better at my job. But this is why I love
Well, it
doing
should
this, because
be
I get to grow. So one of the
easier.
things is they're starting this process, as are many districts, especially with the heightened awareness. And as you said, there's fewer school districts that haven't been kind of hit. We have the key drive, like you said. It was one of the factors where you can put it in, and it also has your thumbprint on it. You can use your phone. So for districts just starting out, what would you say is the first kind of step into getting this into the culture of this is what we do?
Well, so change is hard,
Yeah.
and change in education seems to be harder than others, right? Because businesses have an incentive for people to change, right? People want to keep their jobs and they want to do well. Like in education, though, our jobs are more student centered. So anything that we do that interrupts that process makes it feel like we are hurting the students in some way, right? Or that we're interrupting instruction time, and then things kind of go by the wayside because we feel like it's not important enough to do that. So as part of that first step is a culture change. It's a shared environment of we agree that we're going to do this because of the end result. The end result being that things are safer, they're more secure, they're more reliable. So when we work towards those goals, we're able to affect change.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, and unfortunately, we're a very reactive profession, that we put some things into place after the fact, security
Yeah.
cameras,
Yeah.
insert other kind of ideas like, oh, this happened and now we're going to react. But we're trying to be proactive here. So
Mhm.
to educate leaders, educators, school communities now, what are some of the threats that are happening in schools or to schools that we should be aware of? So really looking at the proactive, not looking at this like, oh, I have to do this, but what are some of the things in your world and your field that you see are happening in the issues going on in schools and school networks?
Oh gosh, where do we start? Right. So schools have the exact same security problems that any other organization on the planet has. And then they have more than that, right? Because schools have an enormous number of users, typically more than Fortune 500 companies in some cases, more than Fortune 100 companies in some cases,
Yeah,
right? You have an enormous amount of people. People make mistakes. End of discussion, right?
sure.
We have to put barriers up that help people to not make mistakes or that help people to not be able to make mistakes or to recover from mistakes when they do make them. So little simple changes like this just give us a sense of confidence around being able to make a mistake, right? I think this is my password. I'm not sure. Right?
Yeah.
Or I accidentally shared my password with a friend. I don't know how I did. I don't know why I did it. I just did it. Well, it's okay. They don't have the other factors, so they're not going to be able to use that, right? Let's just change your password and move on. Or my child also, I work in a school district, and my child saw me type in or used my computer yesterday. All of those kinds of incidents that multi-factor can just put a wall up and say, yeah, that it's okay that you may have made a mistake, but the second factor stopped it from being a problem. Whereas in the past, it may not have been, just like you were talking about before with saved passwords or those kinds of things. A saved password doesn't help you if you don't have the second factor, right? It's fine to have a saved password. I use a password manager. Those are saved passwords, but I can't log into a system until I do the second factor. So I may not have my password in my memory, but it doesn't matter either, right? So that kind of walks us down that path.
And I think one thing I want to clarify in that, because you're talking about multi-factor authentication, you talk about things that you know or things that you have. If the multi-factor is the same category, is that necessarily multi-factor if it's just two things that I know or two things that I have? Like, how would you mix that up, and how would you recommend that to school districts to make sure that it's true multiple factors to get in?
So that is a mistake that a lot of school districts make. Or a lot of companies in general make, right? We're going to talk about school districts, thinking that, well, if I just have two passwords, then
Right.
it'll be harder to break. And that's true to an extent, except that you're just as likely to expose two passwords as you are to expose one. Right?
Okay.
So when you have multi-factor, it literally means one of each, right? So
Okay.
we don't want to combine. We don't want to have two forms of biometrics, right? You're not going to do your fingerprint and a retina scan, right? Because if your body is there, more than likely you get both. Right?
Sure.
So, but when we combine, we say something you know, something you are. It doesn't have to be always in that order either. You could say something you are, biometrics, and something you have, your phone. There was no password involved, no memory involved. Right? So if you have those two factors, that's also multi-factor authentication. And that occurs a lot. That's actually a new methodology that's being adopted, is to say, we don't care about passwords anymore. If you have your phone and you have biometrics, those are two factors and we're going to let you in.
Mm-hmm. So I want to shift gears a little bit, because we've talked a lot about kind of an umbrella, the importance, the security, but all of this is twofold, really. Protect our data is one, but also protecting our students. So how does this impact multi-factor authentication and all of this work? How does this impact our students in the classroom?
Well, it's all about the student data, right? Let's take it out of the classroom for just a second.
Sure.
From a global perspective, it's about protecting that student's data, which school systems have a lot of data about students, and they continue to collect and build more data constantly, right? Everything from grades and demographics to discipline reports and lunch money information and mom and dad information and legal aspects and special ed aspects, all of those things, right? That's a lot of information that parents and students do not want to share with the world. So putting some of these roadblocks in place, or I hate to call them roadblocks because that's
Sure.
they're not meant that. They're roadblocks with doors, right?
I like
so that. If we're able to go through the door, we can go through the door. Otherwise, it's a roadblock. But if we go into the classroom, right, it seems like if you make the process more complex, that it becomes a burden. And actually, it's not, because teachers have confidence that students are logging into a test and they are actually themselves, right? They're not sharing passwords. They didn't swap Chromebooks in the hallway. They didn't do any of those things because they literally had to be the right person at the right time on the right device. That is confidence inspiring for teachers. Also, there are many aspects of multi-factor that allow teachers to reset these things, reset passwords, reset the factors, so that
Sure.
they have control over their own classroom. They don't have to send the person down to the library or to a tech to have all these things done. So when we start to add more layers of complexity, we give more authority to people to control it as well.
So how are you balancing this kind of the educational experience with the safety side of the work, and with all really all the work that you've done in your experience? So what are some examples that balance both sides of that work, that you can balance the security measures with the user experience?
So it's always a balance, right? We we can make the process incredibly complex and very hard to do, right? So like you think about like the old adage of like launching a nuclear weapon or something, and this idea of having two keys that have to turn at the same time,
Yeah.
right? That's multi-factor, but we don't want to do that just for a student to log in to
Sure.
get to, right?
No.
So it is possible to make things incredibly complex or incredibly easy. The balance comes in with finding the right balance per student, right? You can apply different factors for different types of students, different groups of students. Maybe your K-2 students have no need for passwords yet. Maybe they use QR codes to log in. Maybe they use pictographs, those kinds of things. Maybe your senior students, you really want them to use their cell phones. And I know cell phones in schools are a bad thing right now, but let's say you wanted them to use their cell phones because that's good training for when they go to college, when they go into the
Sure.
workforce. They're going to need to know how to do that and feel comfortable with that process. So you can do all of those things as you implement a strategy around MFA. And it really does become just a norm instead of a change that we hate, right? Or a change that,
Yeah.
oh, I don't know where my phone is. I don't know where I can't do it. All those things. It really just becomes the norm when it's the right methods for the right people.
Yeah, and I think it's making it that culture, and this is just how we do it. And I think more of this information, and that's why I'm just so thrilled about this, podcast series with Identity Automation, is getting that work out there, talking to experts in the field, getting that information for the me's of the world who are craving this next step of how this works. And one of the things that kind of I've been really reflecting on after that meeting, it was about a week ago, and it was a room full of superintendents and assistant superintendents, and we heard from two different speakers, one from the state about cybersecurity and one from an authority branch, talking about how the FBI works on this. And we're sitting at lunch and like, we're a bunch of ex-teachers. Like, we're now in charge of this high level security work. And 6 years ago we were teaching second grade. And how does that work? So what is, I've had a chance to work closely with Identity Automation and learn about them. Why is it so important to partner with a company who does this as their work for educators like me, who teacher, principal, administrator? Now I'm overseeing cybersecurity for 13,000 students, 4,000 staff, and 20,000 devices. Like, whoa, okay, yesterday I was writing a paper on IEPs. Like, how does this work? So why is that so important to partner with a trusted, solution provider?
So we know that schools do not have the resources they need to run an enterprise IT department, right? I used to work in a district where I had 4 employees, including me, actually, and we did everything. We did everything. We did it at a smaller scale, but we still did everything. And I wore 47 hats to make it work, right?
Yeah.
By partnering with a vendor, you get to take some of that stress off of yourself, right? You get to rely on experts who do this every single day. Schools do not have the money, the time, or the talent to run a proper cybersecurity program at this scale, right? So you have to lean on vendors in some form. You can't do this by yourself if you're a larger school district. It's difficult. That's the problem. It's difficult. IT departments in the schools have enough to do with break fix, with new technologies,
Right.
with specialized technologies, with so-and-so's printer down the hall doesn't work. all of those
Right.
things occupy their day all day long. And then they have to come back and do cybersecurity policy, right? A company like Identity Automation automates a lot of that process for them. It allows user authentications to occur in the background. It's just peace of mind the entire time, right? If you set it up right, you set up all these things, you let us look at it, you let us work with you, all of those things become, oh gosh, I don't have to do that anymore. Yeah, check. I don't have to do that anymore either. Check, right? And it just becomes an automated process, and it works. It just works over and over and over, thousands of times a day. It works, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, and I know one of the hallmarks that I would say as a principal, when I was principal for 10 years, I'd always say this was kind of like my welcome to this families and staff. And like, I have two jobs as the principal. I want to make sure your students have the best education possible. And make sure they're safe every day when they come to school. And through my time as a principal, it evolved to now saying to make sure they're safe both physically and online in school. And it's the first two I could do because of my background, my education, to help plan lessons, to keep them safe. Once we got into the keeping them safe digitally, I need those partners to help me out and look at like my, I have two quick questions to go, like, what are the future trends? Like, I'm going to need a partner to tell me kind of what's coming down the road. So for you, as I, kind of look forward, what would you give those recommendations to districts that are future trends coming for cybersecurity?
Well, one of the advantages that we have as a company that serves a lot of different school districts is we listen to them. So we hear the things that they're experiencing, and we're able to then translate that and say, listen, I think we had a similar problem over in this other county or this other state. Or, one of the things that we see bubbling up is this, right? And the future of cybersecurity is more transparency while being hidden, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
So more transparency, meaning I want to know how it works, but also at the same time, it's going to get much more complex, right? So things like passwords are old technologies, right? There are new ways of doing that. There are things called pass keys, right? Where we use cryptographic information and we exchange keys back and forth. But to the user, I just click and go, yes, I want to use my pass key, and done. I've authenticated, right? Even though the background is completely and absolutely complex, and there's some quantum computer running somewhere, right? So those things, like what we're also seeing in the future is more schools, more school districts investing more in cybersecurity, because it's not just cybersecurity, it's data privacy, it's cybersecurity, it's best practices. Cybersecurity is kind of what the IT departments are going to transform into. They're going to be cybersecurity first, and then they do break fix and Chromebooks and hardware distribution and software vetting and all those other things. Cybersecurity will be their primary job at some point.
Yeah,
and that's good because that's what we want. That's what we need. We need that peace of mind as users, as parents, as guardians. That's what we want, is for them to have that attitude of, we are secure first, but security without making it harder for anyone. And that's going back to that same balance.
Right? Yeah, it's that balance of that seamless approach, because we've said it in the middle of this is focusing on that student experience. And I could just sit here and listen to you both as in my actual job, but just as a professional learning and evolving and what this new world is. But I want to get you out with one last question is, if as people are listening, people are watching, and we're craving more, what would be one last piece of advice you would give to district leaders or department leaders in technology that, as you said, this is what we're turning into? So if you were to prioritize, what would be that piece of advice? This is what I'm going to give to you as your final nugget.
So I would do the one thing that I tried to do in my last role and never really quite got off the ground. But what I would do is form a cybersecurity advisory committee, right? Made up of students, teachers, parents, community members, religious leaders, whatever you can find, so that they can tell you what they are experiencing, so that they can share what their jobs are doing, what their families are doing, what they see their kids do with your devices in their home, right? Because they are treating them differently at home than they do at school. So when you start to have people start to share that information with you, you have to listen to all this information, take it in. That is where you're going to find those trends of, something as simple as proxy servers that are in use, or actually the kids don't do that anymore. They do this now. That's where that valuable information is going to come from. Aside from, reading the latest trends and
Sure.
the magazines and all the magazines, right? Blogs or whatever, right?
Right.
Social media. I'm showing my age a little bit, but
No, I knew right what you were talking about.
Doing that, right? Like, parents aren't going to do that. Even the IT department is not going to do that. Again, they don't have time for that.
Right.
So having a regular sitting advisory committee of just tell us what you're seeing out there, and then we'll tell you how we plan to respond to it, or how we've already responded to it. All of that forms this enormous amount of trust. You can then report those committee findings to your board to show progress and to show that you're moving the ball forward, and that the community trusts you and they like you and they like what you're doing and you're doing all the best practices. It is gold. It is a gold mine of both information and to show that you're actually trying and you're doing this stuff. That is what I would recommend, as if you want to know what's coming in the future, you got to listen to your user base.
That's such great advice. And I think, one of the first things you said at the beginning, it's about building that capacity, hearing what's out there and learning from it. And that's what we're trying to do. That is the goal of this work and this partnership with Identity Automation, is to talk to users in the field, talk to, customers, talk to experts like yourself, and to educate, because we're all in this together to support our students and to support our safety. So I want to thank Identity Automation for this opportunity to share this knowledge. And Dr. Tillman, I want to thank you again for your time coming in to share your experiences and give such great feedback that I'm going to take in as well in my actual job. So you're impacting the work here as well. And for those of you out there watching, make sure to check back at the last two podcasts if this is the first one you've tuned in. And we have 3 more coming up to continue this conversation and continue educating our community about the importance of cybersecurity and education. Dr. Tillman, I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much. I had fun.